Welcome back to the course on climate change, and this week we are on our last week of the course, and we're going to be talking about possible solutions for the climate crisis. And most of this course has been fairly gloomy and doomy and talking about the bad things which are happening about climate change today and the projections for the future. And this last week I hopefully will leave you with a bit of optimism that there is still things we can do, we still can solve this problem. We'll talk about ways that we can solve the climate crisis in the next decades. But let's again go back and talk about the basic problem, and let's look at the population of the world, the growth of the world's population over a 100-year period. What we know from the 1950s, the beginning of this plot shows 1950s on the left, going up to predictions for 2050 at the end of this plot. Now we have two different parameters here. The line plot is shown, the axis is on the right-hand side, and this is the fertility rate on planet Earth. How many children were born for every woman on the planet? In the 1950s, we can see there were approximately 5 children for every woman on the planet. And this dropped dramatically by the turn of the century, around about 2000, basically due to education, projects from the United Nations, birth control, and we reached around about 3 children per woman at the turn of the century. And the 3 curves you can see going to 2050 are various scenarios from the United Nations of population or fertility rate in the future. The goal of the United Nations is to get to about 2.1 children per female on the planet. If we're pessimistic, maybe 2.6, and if we're very optimistic, maybe 1.6. And based on these fertility rates, we'll have the bars which represent the population growth to the end of the century. This is to 2050 in the meantime, which will reach maybe about 9 billion people by 2050. If we look further into the future, so this plot goes all the way to 2100, we again have 2 different parameters. The red or pink line here shows the growth in population, which in 1950 was about 2.5 billion people on the planet, and we're expected to get to maybe 11 billion, around about 11 billion by 2100. The bars we see here is also interesting statistics. This shows how many people we're adding to planet Earth every 5 years. So every bar here represents a 5-year period. And we can see that we've actually hit the maximum. We were adding 450 million people over the 5-year period in the beginning of the 1990s, and ever since then this has been decreasing. So this is the positive side of the data, that we actually have passed the maximum growth of adding people and mouths to the planet, and we're dropping. But as long as these numbers are positive, above 0, we're adding more people to the planet. And all of these people need to use energy, they need food, need transportation, and so we're going to have more needs for energy, and if we don't change the use in energy, we're going to have more greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. And if we look at another similar plot, the green plot, we've already seen approximately the growth of the population reaching around about 11 billion people by 2100. The line plot here shows us the annual growth rate of the world's population. And here too, you can see the percentage growth. In 1700s, we were talking about 0.04% growth rate in the population, but the maximum we hit in the 1960s, around about 2.1% growth rate. And again, we've passed that maximum, and now we're on the way down, but again, we're still positive numbers, so the population's still growing. But the good news is that we're not continuously increasing the rate of growth of population, and it does appear that in the next decades we'll see the population slowing down, although still continuing to increase until the end of the century. Now, where's all this growth happening? If we look at different countries and different periods, we can look at these 4 panels. The top left panel is the growth by country from 1950 to 2000. The bottom left is from 2000 to 2050, the estimated growth. The top right is from 2050 to 2100. And the bottom right is the whole period from 1950 to 2100. And if we look at what's happened until today, we see that the main growth has occurred in China and India and in Asia, Indonesia. But if we look in the future where it's going to happen, if we look from 2050 to 2100, most of the growth is going to be in Africa. This is a major change in the demographics of the world. We had most of the growth in Asia until now. In the future, most of the growth is going to be in Africa, places like the Congo, Tanzania, Angola, Ethiopia, and other countries. Obviously, when we look at the whole period from 1950 to 2100, India and China still have a major impact on the growth of population. They start with very big numbers, but India, unlike China, has no control on how many children you can have in the family, and therefore India is going to have the biggest growth rate over this period. And again, if we look at the biggest countries, the countries with the largest population in the world, from 1950s to more or less the present and the predictions for 2100, again, we see a dramatic change in where the big population centers are going to be in the future compared to where they were in the past. In the 1950s, we see in the blues, Europe, Russia, the United States are some of the biggest countries, biggest population centers. India and China is leading always at the top because they have these huge numbers of population and will continue to dominate in the future, although India takes first place in the future. But in the future, we can see these orange countries, which are all the African countries. And the African countries are going to be leading in the growth in the future. And this has huge implications when we want to talk about energy, food security, transportation in the future, and how we have to deal with this problem of climate change.